The first meeting is get to know each other. I came up with some quotes from the philosophy of freedom that relate to getting to know somebody. In chapter 14, Knowing an Individuality, it says, to understand a free individuality, we must receive into our mind those concepts by which he defines himself in their pure form without mixing in our own conceptual content. Those who immediately mix their own concepts into every judgment of others can never reach an understanding of an individuality. That's just referring to stereotyping people with preconceptions. We need to have them listen to how they define themselves if we understand what makes them tick and why they are the way they are. Our stereotypes aren't going to tell us anything about them. And then I found in chapter 5, under self-definition, in chapter 5, it uses a comparative method, which it does throughout the philosophy of freedom, and it compares self-perception with self-definition. Self-perception, become aware of the qualities of my personality. Self-definition defines the relation of myself to other things. Self-perception, perception confines me within certain limits. Self-definition, thinking is not concerned with these limits. So self-perception is just based on perception, becoming aware of yourself and the qualities of that you have. But self-definition is where you can define yourself according to whatever your highest ideals are of a human being. And in this meeting, how do you define yourself? We're kind of looking for that self-definition, what you really want to be based on how you've conceived yourself. I took some notes here as far as applying this to myself. How do you define yourself? Me, Tom Last, my self-perception of myself, shows me that I'm tall, I'm older, I'm a male. I perceive myself as a Midwesterner, which is a middle part of the United States. I consider myself a progressive, but now I'm considered a conservative. I perceive myself as courageous, but tactless. So I perceive myself as courageous in that I'm the one that will speak out in a group when everybody's all coming to a consensus and an agreement. But I tend to be tactless at the same time. I'm intuitive, but uneducated. Through the working with the philosophy of freedom, I've developed an intuitive sense of knowledge, but I haven't really been formally educated as far as a university degree. So I lack that. I see myself as being generous, but frugal, which is another contradiction in the sense that if you're very frugal, there's not much to be generous with if you live a very simple life. As far as some things, of course, you can be generous with your time and other things. And now getting to self-definition, which is what we're more interested in this meeting, which has to do with thinking. I define myself in the business world in regards to a career as a self-employed illustrator. I didn't have really any illustrator skills, but I saw an opportunity and became set that as an ideal, and then learned how to do it in a way that where I could make a living doing it, and developed a career that I had for 25 years as an illustrator, which worked out very well. I define myself in the world ethically as an ethical individualist. Absorbing myself in the philosophy of freedom, I took in the concepts of ethical individualism. So those concepts come to mind throughout the day as something to strive for. That's a decision I made. When you define yourself, you're making a decision, you're thinking about it, and setting a clear direction in your life. And the dominant one was I define myself in the world as presenting the philosophy of freedom, which has been the main driving force in my life. And that began back in 1989 when I attended Rudolf Steiner College and was introduced to the philosophy of freedom. And I saw a particular need that I didn't feel that the book was being presented very well, and that it was on the verge of being lost forever. So I took it on myself to try to develop interest in the book. I have a Steiner quote here that after Steiner wrote The Philosophy of Freedom, he started a magazine for the purpose of spreading his ideas about the philosophy of freedom. And he made the statement, "At the back of my mind, there always lurked this question: how could the epoch be persuaded to accept the ideas of the philosophy of freedom?" And I would say that that kind of sums me up as far as what's really drives me. It just seemed to me to be a role that I could fulfill that nobody else seemed to be doing at the time. So I built up this website and added a lot of things of trying many, many different ways to try to persuade people to accept the ideas of the philosophy of freedom. So what's the most important self-definition that you have that's driving you as a human being?
I define myself as deeply interested in the pentagram in connection with the human etheric energies. And I've been trying to I want to find ways to express the virtues of the etheric body, which I understand to be truth, justice, love, wisdom, and virtue, and how those ideals can be manifested in my life.
Freedom for me has been one of the leading ideas in my life.
I don't know, it is a little hard to perceive myself or to even define myself. I always want to transcend what I am. I feel kind of limited by the language. If I was to put myself and to define myself using the words, I think that would be kind of difficult.
I have this tendency to want to push the idea of the Western philosophical tradition as a way of life, which is not a popular idea since the 1960s. A lot of people have demeaned the Western point of view in relation to other points of view from around the world.
The thing that defines me is a strive for justice. I always find myself in position of struggling or helping people or causes that don't have their own voice.
I would define myself as a sales representative. And I spent over 20 years in Waldorf education. And so I was a representative for Waldorf education. And I love selling Rudolf Steiner and Waldorf education.
Self-definition, I would say I'm a child of loving parental God who has unique goals and dreams and abilities or characteristics imbued in me by my spiritual parents who want to see me succeed as my higher self.
And how would I define myself as I'm trying to get deeper insights into the whole philosophy and spirituality of the world.
My activities or thinking is defined as flow versus struggle. It seems like everything I do is a struggle, whether it's trying to figure out my computer, whether it's trying to figure out working with other people that have completely different viewpoints of each other, trying to bring them together. And then on the other hand, there's the idea of flow, where once I get my computer going and I get my drawing going, I really can get into it. I can really sink myself into it, whether it's meditations or reading.
What I can tell at the moment is that I was always looking for truth.